May the words of my mouth and the meditations of my heart be acceptable in your sight, O Lord, my strength and my Redeemer.
Amen.
This past week I received an email from my sister, and she really has an interest in ancestry and studies it pretty deeply. She told me that she had taken a trip from her home, which is in northern Ohio, down to Marietta, which is on the Ohio River in Ohio. And she went there because she wanted to connect it once again with our ancestors. For many of my ancestors were in that space, and some of them in particular owned a farm in Marietta, and they ended up giving as a gift to the city, and it was made into a park. So my sister went to this park, and she actually found some bricks that had the names of our ancestors on them. She was excited. Well, her note has caused me to start thinking about some of the difficulty that people earlier in times had and how they struggled to live. My relatives actually moved from Maryland to southern Ohio soon after the Revolutionary War, and they must have gone by wagon to that space. They took what's called the National Road or the Cumberland Trail. That's how they got there. And I'm certain that it would have taken them a long time to make that trip, several weeks perhaps, and yet in our time we can take that trip in just a few hours. So I was thinking about journeys that people take as I consider especially the readings that we have for today. I go back to the Christmas time when we read about the journey of Mary and Joseph. They went from Nazareth to Bethlehem. But today actually it's tomorrow that we celebrate the Feast of the Epiphany, but today I'm thinking about the reading about the wise men, and I'm thinking about how they came from so far away to see this child, Jesus, to come and pay homage to the King of the Jews. By the way, our wise men are still out wandering in the desert, in case you didn't notice. They're a little lost, I suppose. The star must not be shining quite as brightly today. Anyway, I would suppose that every one of us, especially those of us who moved to Arizona, not many of us grew up here originally, have moved some significant way in their life, have changed their situation dramatically. Maybe you moved for a job, maybe you moved to come visit relatives, maybe you moved because the weather's nicer here, whatever. So we're so familiar with this sense about going places, but I wonder how many of us have actually taken a trip for a religious purpose. Maybe wanted to take a retreat or a chance to visit some important religious place. You know, as I think about the visit of the wise men, I would share with you that people throughout the centuries have tried to add more details to that particular story. And so either from legend or from fact or from word of mouth passed on from person to person, we've been given a lot more information about them. We refer to them as the wise men. They might have been called three kings, but they actually were not three kings. The actual Greek word is magi, and that word can have several different meanings. Most likely, the one that fits is that they were members of a priestly class of ancient Persia, and they studied astrology and astronomy. It could also mean people who have occult knowledge, and they use it to figure out what dreams mean, or they divine what God means. That's another use of the word magi. It can mean magician, which makes sense. It could even mean a charlatan who preyed upon people using some of those things that I just talked about. But most likely they were court priests or astrologers, and they probably came from Parthia, which is a place in Iran today. And over time, we've given them names, haven't we? We've given the names of Melchior or Gaspar or Balthazar. Actually, those names never appeared in any Christian literature until about 500 years after the birth of Jesus. And I especially like some writing that was done by an English religious historian. His name was St. Bede. And he wrote this about those three men. He said, the Magi were the ones who gave the gifts to the Lord. The first is said to be Melchior, an old man with white hair and a long beard. And the second is called Gaspar, young and beardless and ruddy complexioned. And the third, black-skinned and heavily bearded, named Balthazar. And so we have this image of three wise men who come to visit Jesus. And yet I think about the fact that perhaps, and we know that they probably would have taken several years for them to get to that space, and they probably didn't come when Jesus was an infant. So it's unlikely that our understanding of those three wise men and their vision of them that we probably have is totally true, and they don't match what we read in the gospel. And there's a little bit of concern that maybe in thinking about those wise men that way, that we might lose sight of the meaning of this particular visit. For myself, I'm kind of amazed at the dedication and commitment that these wise men had to come all that way to meet the King of the Jews. And I imagine how much faith that they must have had, faith in their understanding of the readings of the times, of perhaps their religious teachings, and faith in their celestial calculations that caused them to get to that spot. And I think that their journey was actually a pilgrimage to a religious journey. Perhaps it might make us think about religious journeys that we take, pilgrimages that we take as well. For after all, aren't we seeking Jesus as well? And just as they put forth so much effort to come and see Jesus, we might ask ourselves how much effort we're willing to put together to come and be with Jesus today. And if Jesus were here today and you had the chance to meet him, what gift might you bring? Of course, the wise men brought gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. And their gifts were things of great value to them at that time. And so that the gift giving that they made was a sign of how much giving of themselves they were willing to offer to Jesus. Now, there was an important early religious person in our Christian faith. His name was St. John Chrysostom, whose name, by the way, means golden mouth. So whatever he says must be true. He said that for by gold the power of a king is signified, by frankincense the honor of God, by myrrh the burial of the body. And so they offered him gold as king, frankincense as God, and myrrh as man. And all those things have meaning to us as well. Jesus is our king and our God. And I most especially appreciate the fact that he was willing to come to earth, to be human, perhaps to understand us just as we seek to understand God. I also appreciate some words that were written by a 17th century priest whose name was Alphonsus Liguori. He wrote about his reaction to those gifts that the wise men had given. He said, "Give me therefore, I pray, this gold, this incense, and this myrrh. Give me the gold of thy holy love. Give me the spirit or the incense of holy prayer. And give me the desire and strength to realize when I am just a mortal human being and I have done something that displeases you. I'm resolved to obey you and to love you, but you know my weaknesses, so give me grace to be faithful." Some words that we might consider as we reflect on those gifts that were given by the three wise men. And all of us know that song, the little drummer boy, and the boy only had his drum to play for Jesus, and that's what he offered, his gift, the best that he had. And so you might think about what our best gift is that we can give to Jesus. It's certainly our faith. It's certainly our effort to follow him. But mostly it's our heart, putting our heart in the right place. Now, when Matthew wrote this particular passage, I think he wanted us to remember that Jesus is not just the King of the Jews, but also the Savior of all the world. So I make a contrast here. In Luke's Gospel, the angels came to visit the shepherds and to ask the shepherds, the lowliest of people in that particular culture, to come and see Jesus. And here we have wise men, courtly people. And it says to us that Jesus is also the God of the wealthy and the powerful. And Matthew makes it clear that Jesus came not just for the people of the Jewish faith, but people of all faiths, of all religions, and all nations. All of us come to see this child and recognize him as the Son of God. And it seems that this passage reminds us also that Jesus was already impacting the world even as a child. He was creating change. For after all, can you imagine what it must have been like in Bethlehem when this group of wise men came and they said, "We want to see the King of the Jews"? It must have stirred them up quite a bit. And we know for sure that it caused great consternation and disturbance for the reigning king. It seems to me that Jesus was already giving notice, that he came to earth to bring salvation to all people. So when we enter into this time of Epiphany, it's another sign, one that we had at Christmas as well, of the coming of Jesus. And it asks us to consider what it means that Jesus has come to earth. And there's quite a few messages. We find them in this letter to the Ephesians that we had today. It says that Jesus came to earth to bless us. And that as followers of Jesus, we are given every spiritual blessing that is available in the heavens and on the earth. All of this is available because we are followers of Jesus. And as followers, Ephesians says that we have been chosen as children of God. For Jesus has broken through the veil of sin, that veil that separated us from God. And now that those bonds are broken, we are able to more easily connect, to encounter God's love and to share that love with others. And through this, Jesus has anointed us as his brothers and sisters. And that's why we receive the gifts of grace that God gives. And we're also able to receive gifts of wisdom. For in this letter to the Ephesians, it ends with the words that we are instructed with the eyes of your heart enlightened, and that we may know the hope to which Jesus has called us. We learn what the riches are of his glorious inheritance and what is the immeasurable greatness of his power. Beautiful words, I think. And the Epiphany also speaks of Jesus as the light of the world. For in this passage from Matthew, it says that the wise men saw his light at its rising, his star at its rising. And we always think of that as a star or a cluster of planets or maybe even a supernova that's brightly shining in the sky. But the real light of Jesus comes in the fact that he came to earth. He shares his light with us. He brings us out of the darkness. And in so doing, he brings us to a place where we no longer have fear, where we're comfortable with his grace and love. His light shines on us. Now, I believe that all of our lives are a journey. My ancestors took a journey. They took a long trip in order to get to a place where perhaps they felt more economic security or perhaps some freedom in a way. And I know that all of us take trips. Maybe we take a trip to go see something special in our lives or to learn something new. Well, the most important journey, I think, that we take is our search, our constant search, and our efforts to see and understand Jesus. And so I ask that we all be inspired. That we be inspired by the commitment and the knowledge and the faith of those wise men. Let's never stop searching for Jesus. Let us seek to live our lives according to his teachings. Amen.